Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of...
Welcome everyone into the Garden of Thought, and it is formal that Garden of Doom and Garden of Views have been consolidated into one, and now I think from this time forward I can stop saying that because it is in fact so, and I've confirmed that it's on all the platforms. Still don't have the new intro music, but maybe by the time this show airs, so if you hear the Garden Views song or the Garden of Doom, don't worry, you're at the right place. All right, so we're very happy to have our guest this week. And actually, this is really interesting. A second author in a row, both from sort of different backgrounds, but this is Kate Smith-Blum. And when I saw her information, she said that she's redefining historical fiction. Well, I like historical fiction, so we're going to find out what that means. So before I prattle on a little bit more, Kay, how are you?
I'm just great. Glad to be here.
Okay, and I want to make sure I said everything right. Kay Smith-Blum. Sometimes I say the wrong names, even though I'm looking at the right name. So a self-described former fashionista and a Seattle school board president. I don't know, maybe I'd put those in a different order. But you spend your days debunking the tropes of the mid-20th century history. We're going to get to that in a second because I want to know what that means also. But you started with like looking over a leaking radioactive waste tank situation at the Hanford Nuclear site, which I imagine is sort of near where you are on the West Coast there, probably in Washington State. And you wrote a book called TANGLES, which got a couple of really stunning awards. So they were named the 2024 Book of the Year by the Literary Global Book Awards and the Best Debut Fiction by the American Writing Awards, also 2024. So that is really impressive for anything, let alone a debut novel. So congratulations, and tell us a little bit about yourself and your story.
Thanks. So my writing journey didn't begin until we sold our family business, which was a high-end fashion European designer store. And we were in the Seattle downtown area, like core retailers for several decades. So hence the fashionista part.
Men's or women's or both?
A miracle in our time that we actually sold our store in 2016. But that allowed me to begin writing full time. And prior to 2016, I also ran for the Seattle School Board as a publicly elected position and then served as the president of the board in 2012 and 2013. So that also gave me a really interesting perspective about a multitude of things. But I was particularly interested in those days because we were about to embark on our largest building cycle ever in the history of the school district, about bringing all of our building protocols and material choices, et cetera, up to an environmentally sound level. I've been interested in, environmental topics and issues for decades. I'm an avid gardener, and so as I was going through writing my first manuscript, which had nothing to do with the Cold War, it was set in the mid-20th century. I came across multiple folks that were helping me edit and helping me hone my craft, who kept saying your descriptions of, the settings and the places are just really wonderful. And at a certain point, I thought maybe I should just be writing like a travel log or something. But I stuck with it and came up with what was a decent manuscript or two, and began querying my first two manuscripts that were both Texas stories, because that's where I'm originally born and raised, in Austin, Texas. And in the process of getting rejected, left and right, as you know, as any author knows, that rejection is just part of the gig, I stumbled upon the current story of the Hanford Nuclear plant, and that these waste tanks that had been encapsulated back during World War II and the Cold War, concrete, huge tanks, were beginning to leak.
Oh, great.
And that was creating a huge environmental crisis. So that I was struck by that, and a little bit drawn to kind of how that all happened. And when I saw a headline that there were 56 million gallons of radioactive waste at Hanford in eastern Washington, which is east of the Cascade Mountains. So Seattle is separated from eastern Washington by a mountain range. I thought, I should find out a little bit more about that. And as I dug deeper, I realized there was a story that hadn't been told.
Well, we're going to get into some of that important stuff, but earlier when you were talking about your store, I asked, but we were speaking over each other. Was it a men's store, women's store, or both? Both. Okay. So
it was men's and women's, and we were the store was founded during what I consider to be the halcyon time. Of all of the burgeoning European designers that weren't carried in America, weren't imported to America. Now it's a completely different spectrum. But in the 80s and 90s, we were the rare retailers bringing over high design from Europe.
So I also am a former fashionista or fashionisto. I don't know. But yes, it's hard to tell. But the suits that fit me the best and I like the best were Canali and Xenia. So
and we had the exclusive on Ermenegilda Xenia for years.
There you go. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, but Boss was all right, and Boot and whatever. But the Canali and Xenia, honestly, I like them even more than Armani. But you had to have an Armani suit if you were a schmancy pants.
Our store was actually the second American account for Armani.
All right, well, there you go. See, this is fun for me. I don't know. I feel like the audience, every now and then they should get to know a little bit about me. All right. So you said you were going to redefine historical fiction, and you were going to debunk historical tropes from the mid-20th century. I imagine those two things are interrelated, but let's take up. What do you mean by those two things?
So I think there is a prevailing mindset that everything was just wonderful in the 50s. And I think that came from particularly the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. And I think that came from shows, that drove a lot into our consciousness, like Ozzie and Harriet or Leave It to Beaver or, many, many different sitcoms that came along that sort of painted a picture of American society that wasn't complete. And so, those were the times when women didn't have many rights, and many minorities had no rights at all. And showing what the world was really like from say the late 30s to the early 60s is kind of my jam.
Okay.
And there was a lot of, I don't know if you were a fan of Kevin Costner and his recent TV series.
Oh, Yellowstone? Yeah.
Right, Yellowstone, sorry. But one of the things that he, really his mantra was, he didn't want any more progress.
Right. He was going to be...
Progress was destroying,
right.
What he loved the most.
Right.
Right?
He ran for governor to be a bulwark against progress.
Exactly. So in that time period that I just mentioned is when there was a tremendous amount of, quote, progress, particularly in our country, whether it was the interstate highway system or a series of dams that supported agricultural needs, or just, normal development in cities with skyscrapers and neighborhoods being transformed into more high-end neighborhoods, etc. A lot of things that happened in the name of progress were not good for everyone.
Right.
And that's sort of the backdrop to almost every story I've written.
Okay, so one day in China, there's going to be someone writing about what you were writing about or are writing about like the last 20 years and probably the next 20 years. You said 56 million gallons of nuclear waste.
Radioactive waste.
Now, is that from a radioactive energy plant? Is it from spent nuclear weapons? A combination? Like 56 million gallons seems like a lot to me.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. So that's exactly why I wrote this story. Most folks, it's a very little known story. Most folks are not aware of the third, probably pivotal arm of the Manhattan Project. That was the Hanford Nuclear plant. And again, located in eastern Washington. So Hanford produced the plutonium for the second bomb that was dropped. Oak Ridge, the other plutonium plant in Tennessee, produced the plutonium for the first bomb that was dropped on Japan. But Hanford's process after World War II ended was determined to be the more efficient and, quote, better process for producing plutonium. And as you know, we rolled right into the Cold War and everything that meant in terms of the nuclear arms race begat a huge amount of production at the Hanford Nuclear plant. They went from 3 nuclear reactors to 11 in a span of 6 or 7 years. And the amount of waste that was produced from all of those plants fills tank after tank after tank and totals 56 million gallons.
This sounds like some Erin Brockovich type stuff. I mean, were there like how did it come out? Did people get sick from the water? Did were foxes growing with 3 heads? I mean, was there a higher incidence of cancer? I mean, all of the above, except for the foxes with 3 heads. Yeah.
But because it was the Cold War, and before that the World War II, it was vital to keep what was happening at Hanford, at Los Alamos, at Oak Ridge secret. Okay. So everything that happened, whether it was on purpose or whether it was an accident, and there was many, incidents in both categories that affected the environment, it was all classified. And those classified documents were not unsealed until almost 5 decades later. So from 1943, which is when the first nuclear reactors were built, and late 1944 is when they began testing nuclear bombs, right up until almost 1990, nothing that happened at any of the Manhattan Project sites was revealed to the public. But at the same time, folks were getting sick. Cancer rates, for instance, the leukemia rate in children under the age of 5 spiked at one point in the 1950s in the Tri-Cities with no explanation from the government.
Where are the Tri-Cities?
The government. Lambs, entire lambing seasons were spoiled because the majority of the lambs were being born deformed. And yet the government never acknowledged that radioactive fallout could have been the cause.
What are the Tri-Cities for people who aren't familiar?
So the Tri-Cities are 3 towns: Kennewick, Pasco, and Richland. And Richland was the company-built town by the government and DuPont when Hanford was established to be the nuclear reservation that it became. So Richland was the company town where the majority of the scientists and many higher level workers lived.
So you basically went back and you did, in essence, investigative journalism. But instead of doing investigative journalism, you decided to turn that into a novel of historical fiction, which writing a novel is hard enough. And while having this material gives you information, your freedom is a little bit curtailed because you've got to stick to the facts and the time pattern and, you know, certain characters and historical figures and whatnot. And while historical fiction gives you some liberty, you probably didn't take too many liberties. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gotten these awards. So, so how'd you go from, I'm going to investigate this, to I'm going to write about it, to I'm going to turn this into a novel?
So it's really 3 major steps. I had seen the headlines, and that really intrigued me about Hanford. And I'd done a little bit of research in terms of how all that nuclear waste got there. And so I had kind of a surface level knowledge of that. But when I was running for school board, I was running in the same cycle as Jerry Pollitt, who is a state legislator in the Washington state legislature. And Jerry was literally running for state legislature because he wanted to codify some advocacy work that he had done around the Hanford cleanup. And there is in place what's called the Tri-State Agreement. And it's 3 different states are involved because they surround the Columbia River. And the Columbia River was the water source used to cool the reactors, the control rods of the reactors. They needed copious amounts of cold water, and the Columbia River supplied that. Hanford actually rests on a bluff above the river. But Idaho and Oregon are also within the spectrum. And so the Tri-State Agreement included protocols around fallout or radioactive sludge or spoiled places within the river between the feds, the Department of Energy, and the Washington State's Department of Ecology. And they agreed to certain protocols around the cleanup, which affected all 3 of these states that had received copious amounts of radioactive fallout in one way or another. So I called up Jerry, having known him, in the earlier 2000s, and said, I need you to educate me a little bit. After that phone call, he gave me a long list of folks to talk to, and I started finding books, nonfiction books written about Hanford, and made my own list of a dozen or so brilliant writers that had all written nonfiction narratives about Hanford. And I slowly, over a span of 10 months, interviewed folks, did deep dive research, downloaded classified documents. I'm forever grateful for the indexes in many, many books, but particularly Kate Brown's Plutopia and Trish Pritikin's Hanford Plaintiffs and Joshua Frank's Atomic Days. Those indexes they saved me hundreds of hours trying to suss out different documents that I could use. And then there are two different places where the public can actually go and listen to folks who worked at Hanford or folks who were involved in the Manhatten Project in some way. And there are oral testimonies that are just rife with all kinds of story ideas at both the Atomic Heritage Foundation and the Hanford History Project. So I spent 10 months doing all of that. And during the course of that, particularly listening to real people's stories that had been involved in the various sites, characters started to form in my brain. And I realized that while there were all these amazing nonfiction books, hardly anybody had ever written a novel. And no one had written a novel that really centered on the Hanford story, particularly during the Cold War.
I have such a simplistic question, and I don't even know if you know the answer, but I'm still wrapped on this 56 million gallons. What, if you were to spill out 56 million gallons into a hole, how big a hole would it have to be? Is it the size of a lake, a reservoir, a small sea? I mean, is it a grocery store? I mean, what does 56 million gallons look like, cubic volume-wise?
Well, I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer that because I don't have those numbers at the top of my head. But I will tell you that the Hanford Nuclear Reservation encompasses 320,000 acres.
Wow.
When they first started producing plutonium, they weren't quite sure what to do with the waste because the waste is in three forms. Some of it is solid or sludge, so not quite liquefied. Some of it is released out of the stacks and it's airborne particles that can't be curtailed.
Right, it's gone.
It just goes whichever way the wind blows.
It's literally in the wind.
Exactly. And some of it was in the effluent, which was the aforementioned cold Columbia River water.
Right.
They had these ponds that they cooled the control rods off in. And when they were cooling off the control rods, all of the byproducts or off products from plutonium went into the water and they let the water cool. Each nuclear reactor had a pipe that went down below the building, the reactor building, through the bedrock and across about, anywhere from 2 football fields to 5 football fields worth of space into the bed of the Columbia River.
Wow.
So
a lot.
There were 3 different types. It was in 3 different things, 3 different pathways, air going into the river or sludge that went into the tanks. And the 56 million gallons I mentioned was mainly this half sludge, half solid, half liquid radioactive waste that came from the production outside of the cooling ponds. And that's in huge concrete tanks. And when I say huge, I mean concrete tanks that are probably more than 100 feet in diameter. Again, I'm not the exact best person to tell you how big the tanks are, but there are dozens of them, like well over 60 or 70 tanks, and they were made of either single shell or double shell concrete, and many of them are leaking.
Right, there's semi-permeable. Concrete erodes like most other things. We don't keep nuclear waste in concrete anymore.
Radioactive material and different elements react differently to each other.
I wish I remembered. I remember when the wildfires in Southern California were at their height. There was something about a reservoir that wasn't full, and fingers were pointed both ways why it wasn't full, and and also people wondered whether it would make a difference or not. And it was a huge amount of gallons. I can't remember if it was somewhere between like 111 or 120. But I don't remember if it was 111 million or 120 million or 111,000 or 120,000. But I think it was like 120,000 gallons. And, people thought that might make a difference. And this is, exponentially more. Add a 0 and then divide it in 2. And then it's still exponentially more. Terrifying. I mean, we hear about most things, or we think we do. I don't remember hearing about this ever. Maybe if I did, it didn't. It went in one ear and out the other.
Right.
I mean,
like I said, Hanford is the little known part of the Manhattan Project story. That it had the most employees. It had the biggest campus by far. It's about double the size of the plutonium production campus in Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Where were the journalists? Where are the main journalists? Where's Alex Jones and Joe Rogan, who, if they're going to cover a conspiracy or something, cover this instead of some of them?
There have been so many journalists that have covered it. In fact, Karen Dorn-Steele, who worked for years for the Spokane newspaper, the Spokesman Review, is the one that actually broke the story in the early 1990s when the classified documents were finally released. But remember that none of the documents were released until the very late tail end of the 1980s. And then by the time, through the Freedom of Information Act, various investigative journalists got their hands on actual documents, and they began to piece together what had actually happened at Hanford. It took a while, right? Michelle Gerber she was a historian, and she wrote the first quintessential missive about Hanford called On the Home Front, and it wasn't published until 2001, I believe, right? So this is all pretty recent, if you think about it. It's only a couple of decades old. Information is still coming out. The government dragged its feet like it did on many different documents surrounding World War II because of national security reasons, and some of those were very valid. And of course,
and others weren't, like Tuskegee. I mean, so
isn't that always the case, though? And it's just the thinking or the decision of the administration what's valid and what's not valid, which is one of the reasons that I think it's so important to stay involved in our government and exercise the rights that we have as citizens to find out what's really going on, et cetera, and that nothing has exemplified that more than this journey I've taken to write Tangles.
All right. So how do you go from having written a book to getting it out there in the world? And then also, I mean, do you submit it to these award bodies? I mean, and like, who even thought to do that?
Well, first you have to get a publisher. And I say many authors have been far more fortunate than me to get an agent. But when I submitted Tangles to two different agents that I had really very good kind of conversations with about my other manuscript, but for a variety of reasons, they both had advised me that my second manuscript, which was a really good story that I'm actually reworking right now, shouldn't be my first. But and they said, "What else have you got?" And I had just gotten the germ of the idea about Tangles, and when I finally 10 months later had what I thought was a very meaty, very attractive story for a lot of folks, a lot of readers, and it was going to be cross-genre. It wasn't going to be just historical fiction. And we can talk about that a little bit, too. And I sent it to them. They both rejected it, saying, "Oh, no, this isn't for us." Okay. And so then I thought, okay, well, I'm going to start over. And I had what I felt was a very strong first draft, and I was still revising. But I identified another 30 some odd agents that I thought would publish something, would want to represent something like this, because it wasn't just historical fiction. It was also a mystery. It was also a bit of a thriller. It had a lot of suspense in it. And then I also identified, at the same time as the 32 agents, I also identified a dozen small traditional presses, not self-publishing presses or hybrid presses, but traditional presses that were small, that also at certain times of the year took direct submissions, like you didn't have to have an agent to submit to them. And in October of 2023, I submitted on the same day. I worked for weeks setting up cover letters and all the different samples that agents and the presses wanted. You know, one agent wants a 500-word summary. One agent wants a 3-page summary. One agent doesn't want a synopsis at all. They just want to see pages, but they want 25 pages, not 5, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody wants something different. So I spent weeks setting up all of these. And on October 18th, I clicked send on all of the emails to the dozen presses and the 32 agents. And within the first week, actually within the first 2 days, I had 3 requests for the full manuscript from 3 of the small presses. The next day, I got a rejection from 2 agents. The next day, I got 4 requests, again, from small presses. So now I've got 7 full manuscript requests from small presses, and agent rejections just kept trickling in.
Sure.
Right? And I'm thinking, okay, what's wrong with this picture? And then within 2 weeks, I had my first publication offer from a small press, and a wonderful press. And I was very excited by that. But it was very quickly followed up with several other offers. So I had a choice, but the agent rejections just kind of kept coming. And even though I'd gotten finally a couple of requests for fulls, at the end of the day, both of them rejected me. But by that time, I was already pretty far down the pike of signing a contract with a small traditional press in Texas, Black Rose Writing, which is my publisher, and I'm very happy. It's a wonderful group of folks that man the presses, and a terrific stable of authors that have been incredibly supportive of my debut.
Okay. Well, I think we've got a pretty good factual history of your story and the stuff. Let's talk about the book a little bit. So tell us, I mean, without giving too much away, give us the tease, give us the book trailer so that somebody wants to buy it.
So Tangles is a Cold War mystery with a love story wrapped inside of it.
Of course.
It is not a tale of the famous people, that led the Manhattan Project. It's a tale of the bystanders and of the folks that actually made our nuclear world a reality. It's a ringside seat to the birth of the nuclear age. And it starts and is based on a true incident. A whale is harpooned off the coast of Oregon and hauled into Warrenton, Oregon. And when they open up the whale, because this is when whaling was still legal in the early 1960s, they realize that almost every organ inside the whale has radioactive elements. And further investigation ties the whale's feeding patterns of plankton in Baker Bay to the radioactive material that was coming down the Columbia River from the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. And the scientists actually wrote a paper about it, tying the whale's inners to the Hanford Nuclear Plant in writing, and the paper was published in Nature magazine in the early part of 1964. So I've taken that true incident, and that is the jump start for Luke, my protagonist, who is a doctoral student working on his thesis, and turn that into his paper with some slightly altered results, but sticking to the real facts. And the alternate narrator is Mary, and she's a secretary in the Hanford Nuclear Plant. From about her timeline starts technically in World War II, but the real storyline for Mary starts as the Cold War begins in 1947 and goes through 1951, because she is the mystery. She disappears in 1951. Yeah. And the connection between the two is that Luke's father, worked at Hanford during World War II and during the Cold War.
Anakin. Tell me his name is Anakin.
No. His name is Henson, Ralph Henson.
All right.
And they lived in one of the A houses, which is a duplex. So Richland, as I said, was the company town, and it was a planned community. So there were basically 3 to 5 types of houses that were built, and the A houses were duplexes, 2-story duplexes. And in my story, Luke and his family, the Hensons, lived next door to Mary and her husband. And Mary's husband is the plant spokesperson and not a very good guy.
All right. So is Luke in love with Mary, or,
Well, Luke is an adolescent. So, of course, he thinks Mary is beautiful and wonderful, but
that's not the love story. That's not the love story.
You never know.
Oh, okay, all right. That's well, you would if you when you read the book, you find out. So
exactly.
Now, I happen to strongly suspect that Christopher Nolan listens to the show. I'm basing this on absolutely nothing.
You think so?
Yeah, I just think so.
From your mouth to God's ears.
Exactly, for so many reasons. But like, he did Oppenheimer. You would think that maybe he would have heard something about this. I think he seems like a good storyteller. There was that other story about I forget what it was, the name of it, but it was critically acclaimed. There was 3 women, and because they were African American, they weren't given the credit that they were due as part of this program. Right. I wish I could remember the name of the movie. I'm so bad at things like this. But anyway, it's sort of like the time is ripe where people are telling these stories. So, like, are you getting any movie offers? Are you preparing maybe a screenplay just in case?
So it's interesting you should bring up screenplays. I've been working on a screenplay, completely different storyline for quite a while. So I know how to write a screenplay. I know how to write a draft. But it's been such a whirlwind with launching the book that I haven't really pursued that. I haven't written what do they call? There's a term for when you're pitching a screenplay. And that will come to me in a minute, but I haven't written what would be the pitch for a screenplay. But I have been told by many, many folks that it feels like a movie. It feels like a Netflix series. So you never know what might happen next. Fingers crossed, right? Because I think that, as I said, this is a little known story, Jeff, and it's one that's so important for folks to understand, particularly with the current conversations out there around nuclear energy. Well, when we're producing electricity, we aren't necessarily producing plutonium, but any nuclear reaction produces nuclear waste. And that waste, whether it's in liquid form or solid form, has a half-life of thousands, if not millions of years. So right now, we're struggling with how to clean up multiple nuclear sites across the United States. 3 Mile Island, there are so many different sites. Oak Ridge, Tennessee is a Superfund site. Hanford itself has 3 Superfund sites designated. So we're struggling with how to clean up this waste. And it's unfortunate that there is a narrative out there that somehow nuclear energy is, quote, green or clean, because nothing could be further from the truth. So we've got some work to do.
So there's
work to do. But again, that's part of my jam, wanting folks to know the history so they can really understand, in many ways, current issues around this type of plant.
Where does the name come from, Tangles?
So I had a really weird dream, and I had the sense I was looking over like a railing onto a body of water, and you can see my book cover in the background.
Sure can.
You can see the pier, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of red hair infused in the water, but then the hair almost becomes a sunset behind the pier ballast, right? But I was looking over the water, and there was a body, a red mass, and I realized it was hair, like somebody's hair was floating on the water, but it wasn't wet. And I woke up and I wrote it down in my dream journal. I have a good poet friend who encouraged me to keep a dream journal. And I wrote it down in my dream journal and set it aside. And a day or two later, I had the same dream again. But this time it was more defined. And I realized that I was on a pier and that I was looking over, think Santa Monica Pier. I was looking over into the ocean. And there was this mass of red hair floating, and it definitively was not wet. And I had the conscious thought in my dream, that can't be a real person. And then I woke up. And again, you'll have to read the book to figure out what that had to do with everything. But it was the beginning of my story. And Luke ends up in one of his very early scenes looking over the pier and seeing that mass of red hair that is in fact attached
to a body,
to a character in the book.
Okay. All right. Well, I was going with solar flare, sort of feel that way, but that's okay. How do they clean up nuclear waste or nuclear spillage? Is there any way to clean it up except to put it into bigger, stronger boxes? I mean, you can't just shoot it into space. I mean, I suppose you can, but I mean, if it explodes, that's a problem.
I want to do that. The current thinking is that they can vitrify, which means to encase the nuclear waste into glass, and then they create these glass encasements for all of this really bad, toxic, radioactive stuff, and then they can maybe store them somewhere, right? The problem is that with nuclear waste, and so many of these nonfiction authors and journalists can tell you much more. I'm not the qualified person here. But the problem is that you have to be able to heat the radioactive waste to a certain point so that it liquefies, so that it can be encased in the glass. That's a very simplified explanation and probably not entirely accurate, but it gives your listeners the gist. And they haven't been able to develop a way, or a burner, if you will, kind of think Bunsen burner, but with a big lid on it, really big.
Right, like the heat of the sun.
Yeah, they haven't been able to develop a device that will heat the radioactive waste to the level or temperature that it needs to be heated to turn into liquid.
I mean, basically, you need
stumbling block.
Yeah, you need the heat, basically, of how Tektite glass was created. With when meteorites crash into the earth and or into the sea, and it's so hot that it liquefies and turns into nuclear glass. I mean, you live, which means you need to create some other kind of nuclear reaction or some equivalent, which I don't know if that's possible. It's the government. We're in trouble. It's the CIA.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I'm so sorry. I thought I had my phone silenced, but it was not. I apologize.
Yeah, well, then you're not very popular. It only rang once. And even if you could get over that and put it into encased glass, you still have to put that someplace. And you have to secure it, and you have to guard it against bad actors, or who knows, nuclear glass eating, microbes that we don't know exist, but they do, because we've never gone under nuclear glass at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean or whatever.
Well, they have determined that it has to be buried underground, and it needs to be in a place where it can't possibly interact with any kind of groundwater. And there are very few places in the United States that qualify. There is evidently a region in Texas, maybe somewhere in West Texas, Panhandle, I don't know exactly, but they already have, in fact, in the news today, somebody was saying that there, are significant problems at the Pantex plant in Texas because there were, nuclear weapons plants in a variety of places during during World War II and then also in the Cold War. So, like I said, there are multiple sites with a tremendous amount of waste or problematic sort of material that's been left over from production or arms and weapons sites. So we've got a lot to deal with. We have a lot to deal with. And I would highly recommend that your interested listeners read Joshua Frank's Atomic Days. It's the most recent nonfiction narrative, but it reads really quickly, and it gives a tremendous amount of really valuable information to somebody who really wants to understand what our challenges are in the nuclear arena.
Well, while the Garden of Doom brand is sort of, semi-dead, or at least on hiatus, or at least not where, we're wearing a mask that disguises it, this might be the actual doomiest show we've done. So, because this is all very real. And
I want to say about my book.
Yes.
If you read Tangles, the one thing that I've gotten consistently from readers is I was horrified, and then I was completely drawn in, and I loved the characters, and at the end, I felt great hope because of the solace that you showed in nature's abilities, and also kind of the solace of family. So I think you'll have a bit of a roller coaster ride with the book, but I think it's well worth the ride.
Well, there's a lot of people who agree with you, and a lot of them are award-winning and New York Times best-selling authors themselves, and that's not easy to get from a rookie writer. I mean, it's one thing if you're Stephen King and you say, well, you write something for me. Of course I'll write something for you, Stephen King. But when it's your rookie book and then all these people with bestsellers and things like that are writing it, they probably really read it and they probably actually liked it. All right, so let's get to the important part. Where can people find and buy the book?
So I'm on every possible platform you can possibly think of. I have a wonderful audio version of the book, and that's across all platforms. It's also available Kobo, Kindle. You can buy it on Amazon. You can go to bookshop.org, which allows you to order the book or purchase the book from your local bookseller, which I highly recommend. If you go to my website, it gives you a link to all of those things. So my website is K-K-Y, Smith-Blum, so Smith-Blum.com, and it will give you a lot more information about the book, and I'm very pleased with the amount of folks and the type of folks that have endorsed my book, along with just a tremendous amount of readers. I'm almost up to almost up to 170 reviews on just Amazon alone, and I'm maintaining like a 4.8, which is almost 5 stars, which is a miracle. So I'm very excited about the reader response. It's really been very humbling.
Well, that's great. Congratulations on all that. Now,
and what you said about Christopher Nolan, feel free to just shoot the podcast tape right off to him, Jeff.
Okay, it's in his downloads, but I guess he can contact you at the contact us. He can go straight to you, and he can skip the publish. That's fine. Got it. Or if you. This
is great fun. I really appreciate you having me.
Okay, well, I've got one last question for you, and this is the unintended but always is a gotcha question, and that is there a song that you associate with this book that you would like to be the outro?
That I would like to be the
outro. Yep. The next when I shut up, that's what people are going to hear or fast forward through before the ads come on.
Oh my gosh! Well, I have a playlist at the back of the book, right?
No, I don't know that.
I have a playlist at the back of the book, so I'm going to go right here and just say, probably it's got to be Dylan, don't you think? Because Luke's the whole thing was, it's got to be Dylan. So it's either Sing, Sing, Sing with Benny Goodman from Mary's narrative, or Blowing in the Wind from Luke's narrative.
You are the guest, so you get to pick. I would probably go with Sing, Sing, Sing just because it's not as...
I think that's a good one. I think that's a good one. And actually, a very similar tune is on my book trailer, which is fun for people to watch. And again, the book trailer is on my website as well.
Perfect. So let's see if I can find it. I got with Joni Baez, King Dylan, Sing. I don't know if that's Bob Dylan. Anyway.
You want Benny Goodman. You want the original, baby.
Oh, so I should do, is it Bob Dylan and Benny Goodman, or is it just Benny Goodman Sing?
Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
Oh, that's easy. I can do that. That'll be no problem. For whatever so Sing, Benny Goodman. Done and done. All right, everyone. You can go to Kate Smith-Blum.
K.
I say Kate? K?
It's okay. People call me Kate all the time.
It's not okay. And I do this all the time, by the way. And is it author.com?
Nope.
Or just
K. Smith-Blum.com.
Perfect. So this is what I do when I try to do two things at one time. Okay. Very good. Guys, check out this book. It sounds like it is remarkable and everyone loves it, and you're part of everyone, so you'll love it too. Thank you so much for being on the show, and obviously I will send you a link when it's available so you can share it with yours. Anybody who's listening to the show for the first time, either by accident or because you're a fan of K's, not Kate's, or maybe someone named Kate, if you just go to Garden of Thought and subscribe, you will get this show, which generally drops twice a week. The weekend show is sort of like if you turn on the History Channel at 8 p.m. and like watch it until 3 a.m., that kind of content. The midweek show, more like this, sort of like a magazine show. 48 Hours was back in the day, or 2020, but one story. And then I have GOT presents either the Book of Black or the Gospel of Thomas, depending on who my co-host is. And that's either PJ Black or Mr. Thomas, sometimes Lufisto. And they are all professional wrestlers, more than 2 decades. And we talk to people in and around wrestling about non-wrestling things for the most part. And it's a lot of fun. So you don't need to be a wrestling fan to check it out and enjoy it. Thank you for your patience. Folks, you'll see us, or you'll hear from us later on in the week.